it's not really the same. So we all have to kind of try to figure out ways to kind of get along in that world. So that's kind of what this is about. So what is corporate warfare? Well, it's what everybody else does while you read Bugtrack and VulnWatch and Full Disclosure List and all that other kind of good stuff. If you're right and nobody else listens, does it really matter? The compliance stuff, policy, all those kind of things will get you to a certain point. And if you've got those kind of things to get things that you need for security, that's great. But sometimes there's things that are beyond that you just can't get any other way. And so this is the kind of thing that people outside of our world, spend most of their time doing, I think. So, the idea here, and where this kind of came from, is when I talk to a lot of security people and ask, how'd you get budget, or how'd you get, another guy on your team, or all that kind of stuff. The joke we all make is, well, it's social engineering, right? So that's kind of the question that I kind of set out to try to figure out, is that really what it is? So, disclaimer, I suck at this too. It's not a core competency for me by any means, but it's something I think a lot about, and it's something that I'm trying to get better at, right? So, is corporate warfare social engineering? Well, on the no side, social engineering in a kind of pure kind of sense is really about, a attacker obtaining, information about a network for purpose of compromise, things like that. Let's, get passwords. Let's get, information about the IT infrastructure, things like that. Corporate warfare is more kind of this long, hard slog. It's a long-term endeavor that you kind of stay in, and the rewards are a little bit slower to come. Now, on the S side, we're talking about a lot of the same toolkit. We're talking about using a lot of the same tools that people on the outside use for social engineering. And for me, it's kind of a reference model. I don't know if everybody else does this. I think a lot of people do, but hacking's kind of a metaphor for life and a metaphor for work. It's just kind of, I talk a lot about in my life about finding the hack. And so it's kind of just a way to keep me sane. I can't really think of myself as a salesman or a businessman. Those aren't really things that I really want to be. But I can kind of refer to it in terms of this. So a methodology for corporate warfare, social engineering, the first thing that you're going to do in any company is kind of try to find the influentials. And that's kind of the 1 in 10 people that really make decisions in your company. Don't trust the org chart for this. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. These are going to be the alpha geeks and potentially CIO, C-suite, people like that. So once you've kind of reconned and kind of pointed out your targets and kind of figured out where you're going to work on this, you want to figure out 2 or 3 kind of key things that you want, whether it's budget, whether it's improved security in your perimeter, or whatever it might be, and just focus on those 2 or 3 kind of key things, because I think that's really hard in our world anyway. There's so many different places that we have to try to secure, and so many different directions that we can go. So it's I think that's, for a security team, that's something that you need to do anyway, is just kind of come up with a couple of prime kind of targets that you're going to go after. On the attack side, and that's what most of this talk is about, the idea here is let's apply kind of tools from the social engineering toolkit to make your InfoSec team successful. So one of the first tools, and this is one that for me I've had a lot of success with, is framing. And this kind of comes from Frank Luntz and George Soros. Frank Luntz was one of the architects of the GOP strategy. A lot of people say he's the guy who kind of won the election for the Republicans last year. And Soros is another guy on the same side. He's in a liberal think tank, but it's kind of the same thing. The idea is it's not so much the terms of the debate or who's right, but how the debate is framed that gets you to a decision. So some examples of that, within our world, a lot of times, like I say, just making the policy argument or just making a compliance argument might not get you there. But sometimes if you have things that you need to improve security, you can go and look at some of the other sort of outside benefits of it. So, if anybody messes with Blue Coat or some of the other sort of caching proxy boxes, they do a lot of really great security stuff, right? They do AV, they do content filtering, they do monitoring, all this other kind of neat stuff. But they also make your network faster. They cache and they improve web performance. So, kind of push that side of it. Firewalls, same kind of thing. I worked for a company that didn't have any firewalls in any of their branches. They had a global network with just routers doing NAT, and that was it. And I didn't have much of a sell on the security side. They just weren't buying it. But in a couple of those offices, they were internationals and they had really expensive bandwidth. South Africa, as an example, It costs something like $3,000-$4,000 a month for like a frame relay circuit. So the case that I could make was, guys, we'll put this firewall in, and it's going to do quality of service, and it's going to tune your performance on your network, and we'll cut down on the traffic leaving the network, and that can save you on bandwidth, which will make you able to keep from having to upgrade that pipe as quickly, right? Another one is input validation, data sanitization stuff. You know, when you're dealing with developers and you're trying to fix like SQL injection problems, or you're trying to fix, you know, cross-site script issues and all this kind of stuff, a lot of times your devs really aren't going to be thinking the same way. Like I say, a lot of people don't think about this stuff the way we do. But if you can push out coding standards and talk to these guys about coming up with common ways that they code and some shared libraries and things like that, you build an authentication library, you build a data sanitization library, and you sell it to them as, hey, this is a way to do code reuse, this is a way to standardize your development process. But, oh, by the way, it's also going to keep you from getting owned. But don't worry about that. We've got that all under control. It's not a big deal, right? So another tool in the toolkit, Robert Cialdini. And where this came from, this is the book that Kevin Mitnick used when he first kind of started out in the social engineering world. And he said this was kind of the book that changed his life. Robert Cialdini is a social scientist. He's a guy who signed up to be an Amway salesman and a Fuller Brush salesman, and worked with like the Krishnas and all this other kind of stuff, trying to learn about how people persuade and influence. And you know, he was kind of working on this concept that there's some people that are pre-wired for it, right? And I'm not really one of them. But there's a lot of people that are. They just seem like they can always get what they want. And so he was kind of tried to catalog and define kind of how that works. And people in the social engineering world use these kind of tactics all the time. In fact, if you watch the other talk on related to social engineering yesterday, Joel Klein, it talked a lot about some of the stuff from Cialdini. So his deal is kind of the click-whir effect. There's certain autonomic behaviors that we have that you can trigger in certain ways if you approach it the right way. And that'll just give you this kind of result without any kind of reason or rationality, right? So that can be a good thing if you need stuff for your security team, right? So reciprocation, this one's kind of interesting. Did anybody buy a car lately? Has anybody purchased a vehicle? When you were in there with the car salesman, did he offer to buy you a Coke? Because they always do that, right? You're in there, the little negotiating room or whatever, and he says, hey, Bob, can I get you a soda? The reason they do that is that reciprocation is something that we're wired to do. We're all wired to respond back when we get something. And that's just, you know, it's our nature as sort of humans, right? We trade and we engage in bartering and all that kind of stuff. What's interesting about the reciprocation response, what Cialdini found, is that it doesn't have to, what you reciprocate with does not have to be proportional with what you were given. So that's kind of cool. So what you could do there is look at, you know, when you go into a battle and you're really talking about something big, you've got an extranet environment you need to secure, you've got some new project that's not coming out the way you want it to be, and security is going to get ran over on this thing. Come in with some concessions. Come in with a couple of things that you're ready to kind of concede and start with that, right? And so then your opponent is going to reciprocate, and maybe they'll move a little closer your direction, right? So that's kind of a useful tool. Commitment and consistency is another one that Cialdini found was a kind of a built-in behavior in most people. Nobody wants to be a hypocrite. Nobody wants to contradict themselves. There's also things like attribution bias and perception bias and things like that, that once we arrive at some kind of conclusion, it takes a lot of evidence to turn it the other direction, right? So with that, once you persuade, say, your CIO to make some kind of foray into security, you know, we're going to cut down on spyware, we think it's a really big problem. I read this really great article in the Wall Street Journal and it says this is a big deal. Then you say, well, Bob, you know, you said to me that was something that's really important to you. And so I'm, you know, from that, I need this $500,000 for, you know, anti-spyware or whatever it is. But use his consistency, his commitment, and play that direction instead of trying to persuade. So you use what somebody else is already committed to, and then you gather more and more commitments from them, go in that direction. And that's actually commitment and consistency. That's also in social manipulation, social engineering. That's what a lot of that stuff is about. You get these little small commitments from people, and then you use those to kind of get further, larger commitments. And that's really what, if you're at a company that doesn't like security, that's really what you're doing. You're trying to make these little steps a little bit at a time, and so you use their commitment to do that. Authority and social proof. You probably don't have this. I never have. Usually the people that are the decision makers in IT are not the security guys. You're kind of these token people that they bring in at the last minute. One company I worked for had a workflow for projects that through that workflow there was a step in there that said obtain exception from security team, and you kind of get security to sign off. And that's part of the workflow for it. So you probably don't have that, the kind of authority that you need. But what you can do is try to win those influentials over and get public commitments from them about security, and that kind of moves the herd that direction. And I think really that's what kind of security awareness training is about too, is the concept of trying to get kind of a group think going and get people all in that kind of direction. So if you can get your CIO or your CEO or somebody like that to send an email out about some new security endeavor that you're working on, it's probably better to get it from them than it is, coming from you, right? So that's another kind of useful tool. We're getting a little further out in the weeds here, I think, for a lot of people. But this is something that I've found kind of useful in dealing with sort of corporate land. David D'Alessandro is a CEO of John Hancock. He's also as cynical as I am about this stuff, so I think he's a pretty good guy. His deal is that we're all kind of commodities, right? Companies pay for a service that we render, and we're there to provide that service, whatever it is. And so we want to be a good commodity. We want to show that we have value. And his take on that is we all have these kind of personal brands that we may not know what our personal brand is. We might be that guy that always shows up at 10:30. That might be part of our personal brand, So think about what your personal brand is, and also think about what the brand for your security team is and how you guys are perceived. And I think the answer a lot of the time is we're the guys who say no. We're the guys who get in the way of big important projects and things, and people see us as somebody to run around. So, and this also kind of goes back to framing and some of those things, is that you want to sort of rebrand your security team that you're the guys who make business happen. And that's kind of, I think that's kind of what the keynote was about yesterday as well. So, that's something that I've found over the years. I've been able to get a lot more support for security efforts by showing that I'm going to be helpful to making business happen. So there's a lot of neat things you would do in the security world that do that. Things like SSL VPNs, antivirus and anti-spyware, mobile security, things like that are pretty cool towards sort of keeping things online and helping people do business. So, that's kind of the rebranding of your security team. Something else that I've found is useful as a reference model is personality types. D'Alessandro thinks there's kind of 3 corporate personality types, and I think we all kind of need to think about where we fit in there. Sycophants, he believes, are 80-90% of any company, and those are the people that just take whatever corporate directive comes down and over-apply it. Policy guys are great sycophants, right? Audit guys and things like that. They tend to take, say, Sarbanes or GLBA or something like that and just over-apply it everywhere, wherever they can stick it. And what happens there is it tends to not be applied in the way that the original intent of it was. Contrarians are kind of the opposite, and I think this is where most, in my experience, most InfoSec people tend to fit, and I know I'm guilty of this a lot. Whatever new thing comes down the pipe, this is crap. This is garbage. Handhelds. I was at a company and they started getting really big into the handheld security. Not the handheld security stuff, but the handheld devices, with WAP and doing, email for the suits so they can be sitting in Starbucks or whatever. And instead of working with them on it and talking about ways to secure it, and there are ways out there, what I did was say, this is going to go away. This is just going to die. Nobody's really going to use this stuff. And I think now they've probably got about 400 or 500 of those out there. And I had a chance to have budget and things to get, security for those devices, but I didn't do it because I just fought, and said no and just stuck my head in the sand. The middle ground between sycophants and contrarians is balanced players. And I think this is what we all want to sort of cast ourselves as, which is there's some directives that come down that are just crap. There's some things that are unreasonable, and there's some that aren't. And you want to be that source of sort of relevant and reasonable information. So, I think we tend to put our tinfoil hats on a lot. maybe be a little bit too far on the contrarian side. So kind of wrapping up, this doesn't really work if you don't add any value. There's a couple implied things in this talk, and one of those is that you've got really good security and you know what you're doing. I don't think you'd be here if you didn't, for the most part. So I think that's kind of assumed. You've got good security tech, and you're way ahead of the game. So get good first if you're not. None of these things are really going to help you if you're getting known left and right. The other thing to keep in mind is a little bit of this goes a long way. Don't over-apply it. Don't make it your life. It's not something that you want to define yourself by. It's just some additional tools when you're stuck in a room with some people that really hate security, and ways to kind of try to move them the other direction. Along the same line, you can't fake sincerity. If you don't love this stuff, if you're not really serious about it, it's going to come across. So, you want to be persuasive, but you're sincere. You're not doing these things just for your own gain. And that's one of the key differences, I guess, between this stuff and sort of pure social engineering, is that we're using these things hopefully for good, and that's kind of the intent. I think that's what we do with a lot of the tools in the sort of the underground, is flip it the other direction. And so that's kind of the way I'm looking at this. Another update. This isn't in the notes. My CSO really hated this talk. So know your culture. Some companies are really conservative. I guess be aware of that. Be aware of how you operate in your culture, and whether people are sort of comfortable with it. Something a friend of mine said that I thought was pretty cool was from a Slashdot post or something a while ago, was the Jedi is kind of what IT guys are, and especially sort of IT security guys. We're both revered and feared. And so you have to kind of be cautious of that and be cognizant of that kind of stuff. I think we all know that. You have that, oh crap, what are we going to do if this guy leaves? Is what most of us kind of get cast into sooner or later. So I guess be aware of that. So along that line, www.cypherpunks.org/resume. I'm in the market, so if anybody is interested in somebody who wants to social engineer security, talk to me. IDS, firewalls, all that kind of good stuff. And that's about it. Thanks. You guys rock. If anybody has any questions, shoot. Sir? Well, like I said, I am in the market right now. Overall, it's been pretty well. One of the things that I've been doing this for about 10 years, and one of the things that I personally would say I've differentiated myself with a lot of other security guys is that we tend to not be connected with the business, and we tend to not really think about what the rest of IT wants. We tend to be this barrier. And I've seen a lot of organizations where security eventually just renders themselves kind of completely irrelevant from doing that, and ends up getting kind of reorged and stuck off in a corner somewhere. I try to really get in the middle of projects and be really involved with the network guys and the Unix guys and everybody else. And I think that, for my personal brand, that tends to differentiate me a little bit. So, and I guess that's kind of what the talk's about. So I get paid okay, I guess. Any other questions? Anybody? Bueller? Cool, that's it. Thanks, guys.